When I first moved into my quiet suburban neighborhood, I had no idea what I was stepping into. The property was perfect. A cozy two-story home with a large backyard, high fences for privacy, and the crown jewel, a beautiful hot tub nestled under a gazebo. I worked hard for that place. I traveled often for business, so coming home to soak in peace after a long trip was my personal reward. But that peace didn't last long, not after HOA Karen introduced herself. She came knocking the day after I moved in, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tight they looked like they'd been stapled together. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said in a tone that felt more like a warning than a greeting. "I'm Karen Dawson, president of the HOA." Then she glanced over my shoulder into the house and added, "We like to keep things in order around here. Hope you're the kind of neighbor who respects the rules." I plastered on a polite smile and nodded, but I already knew she was the type who made rules up as she went along. It started small, of course. Karen complained that my trash bins were on the curb too early. I'd set them out at 7 p.m., but apparently, community standard dictated no earlier than 8. Then it was a notice about my lawn. "Too lush," she said, "and might encourage pests." That was a new one. But the real problem started with the hot tub. One weekend, I returned from a 3-day trip to find wet footprints on the deck, a towel missing, and the unmistakable smell of perfume lingering in the air. At first, I thought maybe I was losing my mind. But then it happened again, and again. Every time I left town, something was off. The water level was lower, the cover slightly askew. Sometimes my towel stash had clearly been rummaged through. I knew someone had been using my hot tub while I was gone, but I didn't have proof yet. It wasn't until my next trip, a 4-day conference in Seattle, that I got my answer. I installed a discreet outdoor security camera above the patio before I left. Nothing too obvious, just enough to get a clear view of the tub and back gate. When I got back, I grabbed the memory card and reviewed the footage. What I saw made my blood boil. There, in full color, was Karen. Robe, drink in hand, sunglasses on like she was poolside at a damn resort. She casually strolled into my yard with a spare key she must have had copied during one of her welcome visits, slipped into the hot tub like it was hers, and relaxed for over an hour. She even invited a friend over. I watched them giggle, sip wine, and make themselves comfortable on my deck. The nerve. I replayed the video 3 times just to make sure it wasn't some weird dream. Nope. It was Karen, clear as day, treating my property like her own personal spa. I wanted to confront her immediately, but I knew that wouldn't do any good. She'd deny it, claim she was inspecting the backyard for violations or something equally ridiculous. I needed a better plan. So I got creative. I started researching. I read every HOA bylaw and rulebook I could get my hands on. Turns out, unauthorized entry onto another resident's property was strictly prohibited, not to mention illegal. But even better, I found out Karen had a history of ignoring those same rules she enforced so ruthlessly. My neighbor 2 doors down, Mrs. Paley, told me Karen once threw a party that ran past midnight, breaking noise ordinances, and conveniently claimed she'd been hosting an HOA meeting. But I wanted more than just a violation. I wanted payback. That's when the idea hit me. If Karen liked my hot tub so much, I'd make sure the next time she used it, she'd remember it, vividly. I drained the tub, cleaned it, then refilled it with fresh water. While it was filling, I added 2 secret ingredients, a generous dose of chili extract, ghost pepper concentrate to be specific, and a bottle of water-activated blue dye commonly used in prank products. The chili extract was odorless, colorless, and completely harmless in small doses, but it would cause a strong tingling, burning sensation when it came into contact with skin, especially in sensitive areas. The dye, on the other hand, was just for visual flair. If she thought she could enjoy my hot tub unnoticed, she was about to get a very colorful surprise. I made sure everything looked perfectly normal. The water was clear, the cover securely placed, and the deck spotless. Then I went out of town again, this time only for a night, and left the camera rolling. When I returned, I didn't even unpack before rushing to the footage. Sure enough, just before sunset, Karen slinked into the backyard again. Same robe, same smug attitude. She peeled back the cover, dipped a toe in, and eased herself in like she owned the place. But the moment her body hit the water, the reaction was immediate. She stiffened, let out a strangled yelp, and tried to stand, but slipped and fell back in. She scrambled out of the tub like a cat tossed in a bathtub, her face twisted in confusion and horror. As she bolted across the deck, I saw it. Bright blue streaks running down her legs and arms, staining her robe and turning her hair a deep ocean hue. She looked like a Smurf having an allergic reaction. She screamed, clawing at her skin, and ran off without even grabbing her towel. I watched her race down the street, dripping blue, cursing and shrieking at the top of her lungs. It was the most satisfying thing I'd ever seen. But that was only the beginning. By the next morning, my phone was already buzzing. Mark, my neighbor and unofficial HOA gossip hub, was the first to reach out. "Dude," he texted, "did you see Karen last night? What happened to her? She looked like a Smurf dipped in hot sauce." I could barely keep from laughing as I texted back, "Long story. Let's just say she's not welcome in my yard anymore." Later that day, I noticed something different on my porch. A formal letter, sealed in a bright red HOA envelope, had been wedged into my mailbox. I sighed, already guessing who was behind it. Sure enough, the letter was from Karen, though she tried to pretend it was from the HOA as a whole. The complaint? Malicious tampering with communal peace and safety, citing use of dangerous substances in recreational water features. I actually laughed out loud. She was really trying to claim I had violated her rights by booby-trapping my own hot tub? Never mind the fact she had no right being in my yard, much less in the tub. The letter demanded I cease and desist from the use of unregulated chemicals, and insisted I allow an HOA representative to inspect my property. "Or what?" I muttered, crumpling the letter and tossing it into the recycling bin. Karen didn't stop there. By noon, she was walking door to door, trying to gather support from neighbors. I saw her from my window, still faintly tinted blue despite what must have been hours of scrubbing. She was ranting to anyone who would listen, waving her hands wildly and pointing toward my property like I had planted landmines instead of peppers. I couldn't hear exactly what she was saying, but the looks on people's faces told me everything I needed to know. She was losing them. Most of the neighbors had grown tired of Karen's antics long ago, and seeing her so publicly embarrassed gave them a new sense of joy. I caught Mark outside later, watering his lawn, and he gave me a knowing smirk. "I don't know what you did," he said, "but I've never seen her this unhinged." I shrugged. Just gave her a taste of her own medicine, literally. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't give up that easily. That evening, I received a second letter. This one was typed, official-looking, and signed by the entire HOA board. It stated that a mandatory meeting had been scheduled for Saturday afternoon to discuss recent events involving homeowner safety and neighborhood decorum. I rolled my eyes. A whole meeting over a hot tub prank? Fine, let's play. On Saturday, the clubhouse was packed. More people than usual had shown up, which made sense. The entire neighborhood had seen Karen sprinting down the street dyed like a blueberry in distress. Karen sat at the front of the room, arms crossed, her usual smugness replaced with a simmering scowl. She avoided eye contact with me as I walked in and took a seat near the back. HOA President Tom Whitaker cleared his throat and began, "Thank you all for coming on short notice. We've had some interesting developments this past week, and a formal complaint has been lodged concerning misuse of personal property that resulted in bodily harm." His eyes flicked nervously toward Karen, then back to the paper he was reading from. I raised my hand. "Before we go any further," I said, standing, "I'd like to state for the record that Karen trespassed on my property without permission. I have video footage of her entering my backyard, removing the cover from my hot tub, and using it without my consent." There was a buzz of chatter in the room as people whispered to one another. Karen's face turned beet red and she practically exploded out of her seat. "That video was an invasion of privacy," she shrieked. You can't spy on people like that." I tilted my head. Funny, I thought I couldn't be spied on in my own backyard. Tom held up his hands. "Enough! We're not here to argue about who watched what. We're here to figure out how this situation got so out of hand." He turned back to Karen. "You did, however, admit to entering Mr. Dean's property without permission, correct?" Karen sputtered, suddenly unsure of herself. I mean, I was just making sure everything was safe. As HOA president, I have the right to inspect properties to ensure code compliance." "That's not what the footage shows," I said, pulling out a flash drive. "Would you like to play it for everyone?" Karen's mouth snapped shut. Tom glanced between us and sighed. "Let's move on. Mr. Dean, did you place any substances into the hot tub that could be considered harmful?" I smiled. "I placed a few drops of chili extract and a prank-grade dye into the water, non-toxic, FDA approved, completely safe. The purpose wasn't to harm, but to deter trespassers. I also labeled the tub, private property, do not enter, which was conveniently ignored." Tom rubbed his temples. The board exchanged glances. Finally, Tom said, "Given the circumstances and the fact that Karen entered the property without approval, we're inclined to consider this a personal matter rather than an HOA one." "But I was assaulted," Karen shouted. "He burned me and dyed my skin blue." "After you illegally entered his yard," another board member said coolly. Karen slumped in her seat, defeated. For the first time in forever, she had no comeback. The room was quiet, and then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another. Before long, a wave of applause echoed through the room. I sat back down, nodding my thanks. Karen stood up, flustered, and stormed out of the clubhouse without another word. After the meeting, a small group gathered around me, most of them smiling or patting me on the back. "About time someone stood up to her," one neighbor said. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years." Another added, "You should bottle that chili water. Call it Karen repellent." I laughed. Tempting. But even with the meeting behind us, I knew Karen wasn't finished. She was the type who couldn't handle being embarrassed, especially in front of people she considered beneath her. I suspected retaliation was coming. I just didn't expect her to escalate things the way she did next. By Monday morning, I woke up to the sound of a strange buzzing coming from my backyard. I tossed on a shirt and opened the blinds only to see a drone hovering right above my property. Its little blinking red light felt like an unblinking eye staring straight at my hot tub. I stepped outside, narrowed my eyes, and watched the drone slowly rise higher, then zip off across the neighborhood fence. I didn't need a degree in detective work to guess who sent it. Karen. She was pulling out all the stops now, probably trying to catch me breaking some imaginary HOA rule. I shook my head and went back inside, muttering, "Unbelievable." I called Mark because of course he'd want to hear about this. "A drone? You're kidding," he said between bursts of laughter. "What's next? A security tower? Infrared lasers?" I smirked. Wouldn't put it past her. The next day, I received a noise complaint. Not from any actual neighbors, just the HOA, claiming there had been multiple reports of excessively loud music coming from my property at 2 a.m. Funny thing was, I'd been in bed by 10, and I lived alone. No music, no guests, just silence and sleep. Still, the fine was real, $150 for disturbing the peace. Karen was clearly trying to hit me with everything she could, so I fought back the only way I knew how, with evidence. I installed a second camera that pointed toward the street. If she was trying to provoke me, sneak onto my property, or falsify more reports, I wanted it all documented. I even put up a small sign. "Smile, you're on camera." Subtle? No. Effective? Extremely. That Friday, I came home from a grocery run and found a pamphlet taped to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead but clearly written by Karen. The title? Guide to Being a Respectful Neighbor, a Message to Mr. Dean. I scanned through it, eyebrows climbing with every line. Gems included, proper attire while in view of others, acceptable lawn ornamentation, and my personal favorite, appropriate use of garden produce to avoid future safety incidents. I stood there, half laughing, half incredulous, before crumpling the pamphlet and tossing it in the bin. Karen was becoming unhinged. At this point, she wasn't even pretending to be subtle. But I knew something she didn't. My cameras were already capturing more than she realized. Later that evening, I checked the camera footage from the day before. Around 3 a.m., there she was, creeping up to my fence in a bathrobe, holding what looked like a clipboard. She peeked over, scribbled something down, then took out her phone and started snapping pictures of my yard like she was on a secret mission. That's when it happened. She tripped on a garden hose I'd forgotten to coil up, stumbled face first into the grass, and let out a barely audible string of curses before limping away into the darkness. I watched the clip 3 times, laughing harder each time. But this wasn't just funny, it was gold. It was proof. She had no business on my property, and this time she couldn't worm her way out of it. I emailed the clip straight to the HOA board and added a short message. Uninvited HOA reconnaissance mission. Thought you should see this. The next morning, I got a response from Tom Whitaker, the HOA president. The subject line was Surveillance Footage, Karen Incident. The message read, Mr. Dean, thank you for forwarding the footage. I will be calling an emergency board meeting this evening to address repeated boundary violations. You are not the first resident to submit concerns regarding Ms. Reynolds. We appreciate your cooperation. Best regards, Thomas Whitaker, HOA Board President. I grinned. The tide was turning. It wasn't just me anymore. Karen had built up so much bad blood in the neighborhood that the board itself was finally taking notice. And when I passed by Mark's house that afternoon, he gave me a thumbs up and said, "Word's spreading. You're a legend." That evening, I was sitting on my porch when Karen came storming down the sidewalk like a toddler mid-tantrum. Her face was tight with rage, and her voice cracked as she shouted, "You think you're clever, don't you?" I stood slowly and leaned on the porch railing, my tone as calm as a Sunday breeze. "Karen, I don't think I know." She stomped closer. "You had no right to film me," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "On my property? At 3 a.m.? After you already broke in and used my hot tub like it was a community pool?" "Yeah, Karen, I had every right." She froze, fists clenched. "This isn't over," she hissed. I gave her a slow nod. "Oh, I know. That's what makes it fun." Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, but I could tell something had cracked. For the first time, she didn't bark orders. She didn't threaten fines. She didn't try to rally the board against me. She just left, quiet, embarrassed, and exposed. And I knew it was only a matter of time before her entire facade came crashing down. The next day, I received another letter from the HOA, this time thanking me for bringing multiple ongoing concerns to light. Apparently, after my video, a few other neighbors had submitted similar footage and stories about Karen trespassing, issuing bogus citations, and manipulating HOA rules for her own amusement. The board was launching a formal investigation. They even mentioned the possibility of removing her from the board. I read the letter 3 times, hardly believing it. Karen Reynolds, Queen of the cul-de-sac, terror of Oakwood Estates, might finally be dethroned. And to think it had all started with a hot tub, some chili oil, and a dash of blue dye. By the time Friday rolled around, I'd heard whispers of an emergency HOA meeting taking place over the weekend, one that Karen hadn't called, which was shocking enough on its own. Mark, ever the neighborhood grapevine, clued me in. "Tom's finally had enough," he told me over coffee on my porch. Said Karen's behavior is making the entire board look like fools. Apparently she even tried to accuse him of conspiring with you. I laughed, setting my mug down. I've spoken to the guy once when he welcomed me to the neighborhood. Mark grinned. "Doesn't matter. Karen's desperate, and you've got her backed into a corner." That evening, I took another look through my camera footage, just in case. It had become a habit now, like checking your mirrors before changing lanes. Sure enough, at 2:12 a.m., a flashlight beam swept across my backyard. Karen, again this time, bundled in a hoodie, crouching behind my fence like she was playing spy games in her retirement. She didn't try to get in the hot tub this time. She just stood there, staring at it for a while before scribbling something onto a notepad and slipping away into the night. Creepy? Yes. Illegal? Also, yes. But I didn't react. I just filed the clip away for what I knew was coming. Saturday's HOA meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a beige brick building that smelled vaguely of air freshener and passive aggression. I arrived early, took a seat near the front, and watched as the room slowly filled. Neighbors I barely knew nodded at me with quiet smiles. Mark sat to my left, nudging me with his elbow. "Look who's here." I followed his gaze. Karen walked in wearing a blazer and a sour expression. She looked like someone who had just been told the wine wasn't complimentary. Tom Whitaker stood at the podium and cleared his throat. "Thank you, everyone, for coming on such short notice. Today's meeting has one primary agenda item: reviewing the conduct of a board member, Karen Reynolds, in relation to recent reports of trespassing, misuse of authority, and harassment." Karen stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "These are false accusations brought by people who've never respected the HOA's rules." Tom raised a hand. "Karen, you will have a chance to respond, but please sit down until then." She did, but not before giving me a glare that could have soured milk. The meeting began in earnest, and Tom methodically laid out the evidence. Footage of Karen in my hot tub, screenshots of her midnight prowls, statements from neighbors about petty fines and vindictive behavior. Every time something was presented, Karen's face tightened a little more. By the time Mark took the floor, she looked like a balloon ready to pop. "I've lived here for 8 years," Mark began, "and I've watched as Karen systematically pushed out every homeowner who challenged her authority. She fined Mrs. Lindstrom for wind chimes, for God's sake. She told my son he wasn't allowed to skateboard on our own driveway. And now she's trespassing on properties and trying to frame people who outsmart her." He glanced at me with a grin. Honestly, it was only a matter of time. Karen finally stood, her voice shaking. "These people are lying. I've done nothing but enforce the HOA's bylaws. If you punish me, you're setting a dangerous precedent. We'll have anarchy." Someone near the back snorted. Tom remained composed. "Karen, the board has reviewed the bylaws thoroughly. None of your recent actions were authorized. We've received enough formal complaints to trigger a vote on your status." He looked around the room. "All those in favor of removing Karen Reynolds from the HOA board, please raise your hand." Nearly every hand went up, including 2 other board members. Karen stared at them, stunned. "Tina? Ron? You can't be serious." Ron shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, we warned you. You crossed the line." Tina just nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. Tom turned back to Karen. "Effective immediately, you are removed from your position on the HOA board. You will no longer have authority to issue citations, attend board-only meetings, or represent the HOA in any capacity." Karen stood frozen, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. She turned to me. "You did this," she hissed. I gave her a slow nod. "No, Karen. You did this. I just brought the receipts." She opened her mouth like she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Then she stormed out of the room, her heels clicking like gunshots against the tile floor. As soon as the door closed behind her, the tension in the room broke like a snapped rubber band. People started talking, some even laughing. Mark clapped me on the back. "That was legendary." Tom approached, his tone quiet but sincere. "Thanks for staying calm through all this. I know it hasn't been easy." I shook his hand. "Just glad someone finally took notice." That night, for the first time in weeks, I sat in my backyard with a cold drink and no anxiety about surveillance, fines, or chili-stained Karens. The stars were out, the water in the hot tub was clear and untouched, and a quiet peace settled over the neighborhood. But I knew Karen wasn't done, not yet. People like her didn't go down without at least one more swing, and I had a feeling she was winding up for it. The following week was strangely quiet, too quiet, actually. After Karen's removal from the HOA board, I half expected a parade through the neighborhood, or at least some celebratory fireworks. Instead, it felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see if the Karen storm had truly passed or if we were just stuck in the eye of it. For my part, I kept to myself, tending to my yard and putting the final touches on my upgraded security system. I even added a motion-activated sprinkler that triggered when someone stepped foot past my back gate. I had no doubt Karen would eventually try something again, and I intended to be ready. Sure enough, that Sunday evening, while I was trimming the hedges out front, I noticed a movement down the road. Karen's old beige SUV was parked just around the corner, engine off, lights out, but there was no mistaking it. She was watching. I ducked back behind the hedge, squinting to see better. Sure enough, a pair of sunglasses peeked just over the dash like a cartoon villain stalking their prey. I shook my head in disbelief. You'd think after being publicly humiliated and voted off the board she'd take the hint, I muttered to myself. Mark wandered over, sipping a soda, and followed my gaze. She's back, huh? He said, sounding more amused than alarmed. We should charge her rent for how much time she spends spying on this street. I laughed. Honestly, I'm thinking of putting up a cardboard cutout of myself in the backyard to mess with her. Mark chortled. Do it, and make it wave. That night, the real fun began. Around 2 a.m., my motion-activated sprinkler system went off, and I woke to the sound of sputtering water and a loud shriek. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and opened the security feed. And there she was, Karen, absolutely drenched, standing in the middle of my yard with her hands flailing and her mouth open in horror. She tried to make a break for the fence, but not before getting another blast of cold water right in the face. I watched her climb back over the fence, one soaked shoe slipping off mid-jump, and land in a very undignified sprawl on the sidewalk. She scrambled to her feet, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her forehead, and bolted down the street barefoot. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. When I reviewed the footage, I saved it in a folder labeled Karen vs. Technology. The next day, I woke to find an envelope taped to my front door. I yanked it off and opened it. Inside was a typed note that read, "This isn't over. You've embarrassed me for the last time. Enjoy your little tub while you still can." Classic Karen. No name, no signature, but it didn't need one. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash, then forwarded a copy to Tom, just to keep the HOA in the loop. "Looks like she's trying to escalate," I added in the email. "Let me know if she shows up to another meeting with a flamethrower." But Karen didn't go the flamethrower route. No, she went with something much dumber. The following Friday, I got a text from Mark. "Check your backyard. Now." Heart racing, I stepped outside and froze. Someone had dumped what looked like gallons of bubble bath soap into my hot tub. The water was overflowing with thick, frothy foam, covering the patio like a rabid dishwasher had exploded. I stepped closer, sniffing the air. Lavender-scented, of course. And just as I feared, the tub's control panel was flickering. She had broken it again. I shook my head, already pulling out my phone. I had all the proof I needed, courtesy of my upgraded cameras. Footage showed Karen sneaking in under the cover of night, dragging a massive plastic jug of bubble bath, and dumping the whole thing into the tub with a flourish. It was like watching a villain monologue in the dark. She even posed for a second, like she expected applause. This time, I didn't just email Tom. I filed an official police report for vandalism. Karen had been warned, removed from power, and still kept crossing boundaries. It was time she learned the hard way. The responding officer, a young guy named Daniel, took the footage and my statement. "Honestly," he said, reviewing the tape, "this is one of the funniest crimes I've seen all month. But yeah, this is trespassing and property damage. We'll move forward." When Karen got the visit from the police, I knew immediately. Mark told me he saw the squad car pull up outside her house and heard raised voices through the window. I imagined her arguing, insisting she was the real victim, waving her HOA badge like it still meant something. But it didn't. Not anymore. By Monday, I received confirmation that a restraining order had been filed. Karen was now legally barred from stepping foot on my property. But as satisfying as that was, it still wasn't over. Not quite. Because just when I thought she had run out of steam, Karen pulled a move so insane, so bizarre, that it outdid everything else. She tried to crash the HOA's annual spring community potluck. It was supposed to be a happy event. Tables of food lined the park, kids played in bounce houses, and for once the neighborhood felt united. Lancaster had done a great job running the board since Karen's removal. There were no ridiculous fines, no surveillance squads, no passive-aggressive rule reminders, just people being neighbors. And then, like a thundercloud rolling in on a sunny day, Karen arrived. She marched into the park wearing a floral dress and oversized sunglasses, carrying a tray of deviled eggs and acting like nothing had happened. Conversations stopped. Someone dropped a plastic cup. A few people gasped. I stood under the pavilion near the drinks table, arms folded. She spotted me and smiled like a cartoon villain. I walked over calmly. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice light, "this is a community event. You're not on the board anymore." She sniffed. "I'm still a resident. I'm entitled to be here." I raised an eyebrow. "Under the terms of the restraining order, you're not allowed within 20 feet of me or my property." She blinked. "This isn't your property." I pointed to the chalk line on the pavement. "Actually, I helped organize this event. The city granted a permit in my name, so technically right now it is." Her expression shifted. For a moment I saw the flicker of realization, the panic behind her sunglasses. "This is harassment," she snapped. "You're targeting me." "Karen," said Lancaster, approaching from the buffet line. "You need to leave, now, or we'll have the police escort you out." She hesitated, clutching her deviled eggs like they were her last line of defense. "Fine," she said, her voice tight. "But this isn't the end." As she turned to leave, she muttered something about sabotaging the chili next year under her breath. Mark, standing next to me, whispered, "What a legend. We need to make a movie out of this." I chuckled, watching her retreat. "I already have the footage." Karen's dramatic exit from the potluck wasn't her swan song, though it certainly felt like one. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood finally seemed to return to a state of peace. No more unsolicited HOA citations tucked under windshields. No more threats taped to front doors, and no more mysterious appearances in backyards and hot tubs. It was like the whole street had collectively exhaled. I found myself enjoying the silence, appreciating the warm weather, and getting back to my original dream retirement bliss uninterrupted. My hot tub had been repaired after the bubble bath incident, and now it glowed a calming blue in the evenings, framed by a string of soft patio lights. I even upgraded it with a locking cover and temperature controls connected to my phone. Karen wouldn't be getting back in without launching a covert mission from NASA. Still, for good measure, I added one final detail: a small, laminated sign next to the steps that read, "Unauthorized sitters will be dyed and spiced." One afternoon, while watering my peppers and enjoying a coffee, Mark came over with a huge grin. "Dude," he said, barely able to contain himself, "you're not going to believe what I just heard." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Let me guess, Karen bought a hot tub and it exploded?" He laughed. "Close. She tried to apply for the HOA president spot in her new neighborhood. Got laughed out of the room." I blinked. "Wait, she moved?" Mark nodded. 2 towns over, small gated community. She showed up to her first HOA meeting with printed flyers about new rule proposals and apparently got shut down so fast, she stormed out yelling something about how real neighborhoods are run. I nearly spit out my coffee. That woman will never learn. It was poetic, in a way. She'd lost her seat of power, her ability to manipulate, and most importantly, her perceived control over the rest of us. She had tried to make everyone live by her rules, and ended up being the one driven out. I hadn't needed revenge. All I had to do was set boundaries, stand up for myself, and let her implode under her own ego. A month later, I got a knock at the door. I opened it to find Lancaster, the new HOA president, holding a clipboard and looking unusually formal. "Hey," he said with a warm smile. "Don't worry, no violations. Just wanted to talk." I let him in and offered him a drink as we sat on the porch. "What's up?" I asked. "We're creating a neighborhood recognition award," he explained. "Something to celebrate residents who go above and beyond to improve the community. And we want to name the first award after you." I blinked. "Wait, seriously?" "Absolutely," he said. "You stood up for yourself and others, helped push for reform, and you made this neighborhood fun again. Plus, the chili dye hot tub story is basically legendary now." I chuckled. "Well, I guess I'll take it. What's it called?" "The Spice and Justice Award," he grinned, to commemorate the moment Karen realized she wasn't the queen of Oak Ridge anymore. That weekend, at a small HOA gathering, they presented it to me. A little plaque, tastefully engraved, with a small red pepper etched into the side. People clapped, laughed, and even a few neighbors I hadn't spoken to before came up to shake my hand. It wasn't just about the hot tub, it was about the message. That bullies only win when people stay silent. And when someone finally pushes back, the whole system can change. The icing on the cake came one morning when I checked my inbox and found a video file sent anonymously. It was grainy security footage, but the title said it all: Karen's Final Soak. I clicked it and laughed until I cried. It was from the bubble bath incident. Someone else had captured her shrieking as the foam poured over the patio, stumbling around like a sudsy swamp creature. The clip had somehow made it onto TikTok, gaining thousands of likes under the tag #HotTubKaren. "I swear," I muttered to myself, wiping tears from my eyes. "I couldn't have planned this better if I tried." In the following months, Oak Ridge blossomed into a real community. The HOA operated with transparency, residents actually smiled at each other, and block parties became regular events instead of passive-aggressive war zones. The hot tub became a sort of neighborhood legend. People joked about adding chili dye to their pools as a Karen repellent. Someone even brought me a hand-painted sign that read, "Home of the original ghost spa." But my favorite moment came one sunny afternoon when a little girl from down the street knocked on my door with her dad behind her. She handed me a small potted pepper plant and a card that read, "Thanks for keeping the neighborhood safe and spicy." Her dad laughed and added, "She wanted to grow ghost peppers like the hero." I was floored. It wasn't just about fighting Karen anymore. It was about inspiring people to stand their ground and live without fear of being policed for nonsense. It was about reclaiming the joy of community. And if it took a little chili powder and a splash of dye to get us there, so be it. As I stood on my patio that night, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops, hot tub bubbling gently behind me, I thought back to the first time I caught Karen sneaking in. I remembered how furious I was, how powerless I felt, and then I looked around at the peaceful street, the waving neighbors, the quiet hum of contentment, and I smiled. She thought she could steal my peace, but she ended up handing it back, one spicy splash at a time. And I made sure she'd never sit in my tub or this town ever again.